بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity for us to continue in our lesson in the Aqaid of Al-Imam Al-Nasafi and the commentary of Al-Imam Al-Taftazani. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with the understanding, and may Allah make this lesson a reason where our sins are forgiven and our prayers are answered, inshallah ta'ala. Ameen ya rabbal alameen. Before we continue to our lesson today, what I will do is I will just run through some of the important things that we have covered so far in these lessons of the commentary of Aqaid Nasafiyyah. So Al-Imam Al-Nasafi, he began his Aqaid by speaking about the causes of knowledge. So far we have covered the first two causes of knowledge, as he mentioned. Number one is pertaining to the senses, and then he spoke about truthful reports. So number one is the hawas, and number two is al-khabar al-sadiq. And he mentioned there are two things pertaining to khabar al-sadiq. Number one is the mutawatirat, the mass transmitted reports, and the other one is khabar al-rasul al-mu'ayyad bil-mu'jizat. That is the reports from prophets and messengers that are aided with miracles. So this is the things that we have covered in the past few lessons. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we will enter into the third causes of knowledge. And another thing is that some of you might ask why the author began by speaking about causes of knowledge. We have not gone into the discussion on the tenets of faith and aqidah. It is important to understand on the causes of knowledge, because this is the foundation of our understanding. The foundation of our understanding and belief is to understand the source that where we attain the knowledge. So it is important to understand the sources and these causes, so that we are able to appreciate when we enter into the chapter of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we are able to understand it thoroughly, and we can understand many arguments that are contrary to Islam when it comes to epistemology or the concept of knowledge. So that is why the author mentioned in this introduction to ilmu kalam on how we know what we know. So we are going into the third category, that is al-aql. So this is going to be our lesson today, inshallah ta'ala. Actually, we have planned in last week in our WhatsApp group, I mentioned that we are going to have our class on site, but because of the COVID situation, this class again has to be online, because I would like to have what you call it, the Q&A session with those who are following these classes. But it's okay, inshallah, we just continue online. One thing good about online is that I do not know, maybe it's easier for me to display the text. So inshallah ta'ala, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the situation any better, inshallah. So let us go back into our kitab. That is the commentary by Al-Imam Al-Taftazani. So this is what he mentioned after what we have mentioned before this. So he mentioned السبب الثالث, the third cause of knowledge, al-aql. It is the intellect. So he said وأما العقل. So the ones in brackets are the words of Al-Imam Al-Nasafi. So Al-Imam Al-Nasafi he mentioned as for the intellect. So he began by speaking about the definition of the intellect. What is the meaning? What is the meaning of al-aql? So he mentioned a few any definition. The first any definition and he mentioned وَهُوَ قُوَّةٌ لِلنَّفْسِ, yani it is what you call it, the yani the strength any of the soul, or we say the here it is translated any as the faculty any of the soul. But here basically any what he meant any is something any that is existent any within any ourselves, that give us any the ability, so he said that وَهُوَ قُوَّةٌ لِلنَفْسِ بِهَا تستعد للعلوم, that give us any the ability any to inherit knowledge or to acquire knowledge, للعلوم والإدراكات, yani to acquire any knowledge any and what you call it, understand things any around us. So this is any the first any definition. Basically any he mentioned what is any the meaning of al-aql, what is any the meaning any of the intellect. In the Quran any there are many verses any that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned any about the intellect. For example, Allah say لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ, yani we have sent down in the Quran in the Arabic language to a people yani who will use any their aql, لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. So we are in need any of our intellect need to understand the Quran and to understand the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And our ulama, they what you call it, bring any the laws, they take any the laws any of the divine sources any of the Quran and the Sunnah. They derive any basically derivation any of the laws. Any all this any is by the intellect. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks any about the importance any of the intellect any for insan, and it is a speciality any of human beings any that they possess this intellect. So this is any the first any definition. So basically to summarize any this definition, the meaning any of al-aql any is basically it is what you call it, an ability within any ourselves and in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with, that by it we are able any to understand knowledges, and that we are able any to understand things around us. وَهُوَ الْمَعْنَى بِقَولِهِمْ غَرِيزَةٌ يتبعها العلم بالضروريات عند سلامة الآلات. So he said that the meaning what is meant any by the saying that it gives us any this ability that we are able any to understand any knowledges, it is this natural ability any that is present, any in human beings, that he is able any to acquire any knowledge on any things any that are daruriyat, any things any that are necessary in the salamatil alat, yani with the condition any that the other senses any what you call it working or functioning, and we are able any to understand the things any and process any information through any the senses that we see, the things any that we hear, the things any that we touch. So our intellect any is the one any that process any that is the one that process any that information. So it is dependent any on the senses. It is dependent any on the senses. So this is any an extension any of the first introduction. وقيل, and then he mentioned any the second definition of al-aql, جوهر. So the second any definition, and he mentioned that the aql is jawhar, yani it is a substance. So the first any definition speaks about as an attribute within human beings, that human beings and has the ability to comprehend, to understand. The second any definition he mentioned it is a substance. So the difference any is basically number one, and he speaks any about the attribute definition and in terms any of the attribute, and number two, and he speaks any the intellect any as a substance, that by it any يدرك به الغائبات بالوسائط, that we are able any to understand any unseen things by other means. We are able any to understand things any of the unseen by other means. والمحسوسات بالمشاهدة, and for the things any that are seen, that we are able any to understand it any by observation. by observation. So we are able any to process any that information that we get any from our senses. So basically, the second definition and it speaks any about basically it's about the same meaning, and it's just that the difference as what I mentioned. One speaks any about the intellect any as an attribute. The second thing and it speaks any about intellect any as a substance that is able any to understand any the things any that is unseen through yani causes or through intermediaries, and likewise able any to understand the things any around us any through observation. So this is basically the definition any of the intellect. And then any he mentioned فهو سبب للعلم أيضا. He said the intellect any is also one of the causes any of knowledge. The reason and he mentioned this any is explained after this, because any there are differences by some philosophers. He mentioned any this Indian philosophers. There are some what you call it Indian any philosophers any who rejected any some ideas any that the intellect any cannot understand the things any that are based any on what you call it on nadariyat. So this is where he mentioned Sharh bidhalika, yani Imam Taftazani, and he explained why Al-Imam Nasafiyyah and he mentioned وهو سبب للعلم أيضا, that the intellect and he is also one of the cause of knowledge, because he says صرح بذلك لما فيه من خلاف الملاحدة والسمنية. So because any there are differences any amongst any the atheists, the malahida, those any who reject the existence any of God, and the sumniya. And sumniya any is a philosophy any within the Indian any tradition. في جميع النظريات. So they say that the intellect any does not have the ability to comprehend and understand all forms of knowledge that is nadari. That what you call it, the intellect any cannot understand with certainty knowledge any that is based on ponderance. Knowledge that is based on ponderance. Before this any we mentioned that there are two types any of knowledge. We have the daruri and nadari. Daruri any is knowledge that you are not in need any to ponder. It is knowledge any that comes close to you. Whereas this when we speak about knowledge that is nadari, it is knowledge any that requires ponderance. So this is the difference any between daruri and nadari. So when we come across any this terminology, daruri, nadari, we understand daruri any is something any that is instant, that you know it any instantly. Any for example any I always any give this example any that the sky is above us, the what you call it, the earth any is below us. This is daruri. You are not in need any to ponder upon any the truth any of this statement. But when comes any to nadari any, for example any mathematical any equation that you are in need any to sit down and think and to ponder, this is nadari. So the atheists and the some any philosophers any the sumniya, that is called as the sumniya, they have differences any pertaining to nadariyat, that knowledge any that knowledge any on things any that requires any on ponderance. So he said وَبَعْضُ الْفَلَاسِفَةِ فِي الْإِلَهِيَاتِ, and some any philosophers any on metaphysics, بِنَاءً عَلَى كَثْرَةِ الْإِخْتِلَافِ وَتَنَاقُضِ الْآرَاءِ. So they have differences any amongst any themselves. So they are saying that the intellect any cannot come with certainty on knowledge any that is based any on nadari, and they have differences. They have differences any in this, and even any nowadays any people are skeptical any about the ability any of the intellect any towards knowledge that is daruri, knowledge any that is based any on our senses any. For example, people any have this skepticism on existence any, for example, and when they look any at a particular thing, they are skeptical any whether this is in existence any or not any in existence. Even this is knowledge any that is daruri, correct or not? And when we see any a cup and we know it is in existence, this is daruri. Yeah, we don't need any things what you call it, time any to ponder any upon this reality. But there are people any who reject this, and they have any differences any amongst any themselves pertaining any to does any this what you call it, is this any the reality or not the reality, whether this is the truth or not the truth. So they have any these doubts any and these differences any amongst them. So Al-Imam Taftazani, and he mentioned, wal jawabu. So he said, why people have differences on as to whether the intellect can bring any to certainty any on things any that are acquired through observation or acquired any to ponderance. So he said the differences any because lifasadin nazar, because when they ponder and when they observe, their observation, the methodology of their observation is not correct. That is why they have differences amongst themselves. فلا ينافي كون النظر الصحيح من العقل مفيدا للعلم. So he said that if a person's any observation and methodology is correct, then his observation and he will bring him towards any certainty. على أن ما ذكرتم استدلال بنظر العقل ففيه إثبات ما نفيتم فيتناقض. So he said that the differences in themselves is a result of ponderance. It's a result of ponderance. So these people when they differ amongst themselves, all of them has their own conclusion, their own way of ponderance. So when they reject that the intellect is unable to lead to certainty on things that are nazari, that are based on ponderance, they are contradicting themselves, because their conclusion in saying that there are differences due to the fact that there are differences amongst the philosophers pertaining to this. This does not mean that the problem is the intellect. The problem is in the way on how they ponder and the way they observe. So this also goes back to the intellect, pertaining to pondering upon knowledge that is acquired through ponderance, that is the knowledge of knowledge. So to reject the fact that the intellect has the ability to come to a certainty or knowledge that is based on observation and ponderance, this is a contradiction. The one who says this is contradicting himself. How does he contradicting himself? How does he contradicts himself? Because the thing is, this conclusion that they are making itself is part of using the intellect to ponder or to observe. So when we are using the intellect to come to a certain conclusion, and at the same time we are rejecting the ability of the intellect to do so, then this is where the contradiction comes. So Al-Imam Taftazani, he said that at the end of the day, he said that the problem is not the intellect. Basically, this is what he's saying. Say wal jawabu anna dhalika li fasadin nazar. So he said that the fault is the way how you ponder upon things, the way how you observe. So the fault is not the intellect. So if any human beings use their intellect correctly with a profound methodology, it will lead him to knowledge. It will lead him into knowledge of certainty. But why people have differences to this? Because they are using this methodology wrongly. So they cannot deny the fact that the intellect can lead to knowledge. So this is basically what he's saying. Even for those who reject, at the end of the day, they still use the intellect to come to their conclusion. So how can they reject the inability to the intellect while they are using their intellect to come to the conclusion that they are in? So that shows that the intellect, is one of the causes of knowledge. So he said, فَإِنْ زَعْمُوا أَنَّهُ مُعَارَضَةٌ لِلْفَاسِدِ بِالْفَاسِدِ. So what they did was, if they reject that, they say that, for example, the intellect does not have the ability to acquire knowledge of certainty, of certainty. So earlier we mentioned there is a contradiction, because they themselves are using that intellect to come to that conclusion, and at the same time they are contradicting and themselves and by rejecting that ability any of that intellect. So Al-Imam Taftazani and he mentioned they are using that rejection and which they, to them and it is fasid and is something that is corrupt. To them and it is something and that is corrupt, and at the same time they brought any their conclusion with their intellect, which they themselves and in the first place look at it as something that is corrupt. So they are using that same intellect with the conclusion that their intellect cannot bring them to conclusions of knowledge based on certainty. So he said that this is corruption that leads to corruption. The corruption that leads to corruption. So again basically he's trying to tell that they are wrong. That the human intellect can bring about knowledge of certainty. And it doesn't mean that people differ on the conclusion. It doesn't mean that the intellect does not have the ability. It is just the fault lies with the people who uses the intellect wrongly. And then he goes on to say قلنا إما أن يفيد شيئا فلا يكون فاسدا أو لا يفيد فلا يكون معارضة. So he said that the intellect, what you call it, it gives any benefit, and it cannot be considered to be what you call it corrupt, or if it doesn't give any benefit, for there is no any contradiction. But what is important is that it is one of the cause that human beings can attain any knowledge. So I will not go much on this. I do not want to confuse anyone. Basically, let me summarize. Basically, Al-Imam Taftazani, he is just defending the opinion of Al-Imam Nasafiyyah, who is saying that the intellect is one of the causes of knowledge. But the fact that there are some philosophers who reject this. Some philosophers says that the intellect is not the causes of knowledge. That al-aql is not the causes of knowledge. That you cannot depend on your intellect to attain knowledge. So Al-Imam Taftazani is saying this is a strange statement. How can you say that when you yourself use your intellect to come to the conclusions that that you have? So how can you reject something and say that it cannot give you knowledge, but yet you are using it and you are claiming that you have that knowledge? So that is a contradiction. So you are using something that is corrupted, which you yourself said it is corrupted because intellect cannot give you knowledge, but you are using what you are seeing it as something that is corrupted to as an evidence to your claims, as an evidence to your claims and to your conclusion, which you yourself use that same intellect. So it is corruption that leads into your to the any corruption. So this basically what he's saying, and then after that he mentioned that this shows that no matter what the intellect gives any benefit, that gives any people any knowledge, and even if people does not use their intellect correctly, there is no contradiction. So it doesn't mean that when people have differences, it doesn't mean that it is the fault of the intellect, but it is the fault of how people use the intellect. So this is basically the summary. So in the first glance, it might see like something that is very tough, but actually this is the main thing, and he's basically saying at the end of the day, he's just saying that the intellect brings you knowledge. That one of the ways of acquiring knowledge is by the intellect. This basically the gist of what Al-Imam Nasafiyyah is saying. Al-Imam Taftazani is just what you call it, bringing in so many of these arguments. طيب. And then he goes on. Then this is another explanation, another way I need to explain. So he said, فَإِنْ قِيلَ, if it is said. So maybe let me read the English. Those who are attending the class, you are depending on the English translation. So let us read the English. So he said, as for the intellect, it is a faculty of the soul. With it the person is prepared to acquire the various sciences and matters to be comprehended. It is the intended meaning any by the saying the intellect is an innate property when the instruments any are sound knowledge of the necessary matters any shall follow. It's only no problem when you say that the intellect any is one of the causes any of knowledge, and it depends any on the other senses, what you call it, to process any that knowledge. It has also already been said that the intellect is a substance. These are the differences in the definition as what I mentioned, by which any unseen matters by mediums and the mahsoosaat matters perceived any through the senses through witnessing, mushaahadah. Then he said it is a cause of knowledge. He clearly stated that due to the arguments which exist regarding it among the atheists and the Sumaniya in all of the speculative any matters. So speculative matters any is a translation any for nadari. And nadari any is what I mentioned, any knowledge any that requires any ponderance. And some of the philosophers any in metaphysical any matters based on excessive, different and conflicting points any of view. They have differences any amongst any themselves pertaining any to the conclusions any that arrive on metaphysical any issues any on issues any of godly attributes and so on. The response is that is due to the corruption of their speculation. So this is what basically I mentioned earlier. It is because any of how any they use any their intellect. So it is does not negate the fact that the sound speculation and from the intellect is capable of bringing about knowledge based on the fact that what you have mentioned is istidlal, using any the speculation any of the intellect. Thus in that is the very thing which you have negated, so they contradict any one another. So how can any a person negate the ability any of the intellect to bring about knowledge when they themselves any are using any the intellect to come to the conclusions any that they are coming at? If they claim that this is opposing the corrupt and invalid with what is correct, we say either it brings any about something and therefore it is not any corrupt, or it does not bring about anything, in which case it will not be an opposition. Aywa. Then he mentioned فإن قيل كون النظر مفيدا للعلم إن كان ضروريا لم يقع فيه خلاف كما في قولنا الواحد نصف الاثنين وإن كان نظريا لازم إثبات النظر بالنظر وإنه دور. So this is again like a Q&A format by Al-Imam Al-Taftazani. So again this is some many of the questions that may arise from the things any that he explained. So he said that if it is said the fact that speculation brings about knowledge, if it is daruri, there is no argument regarding that, like in our statement, one is half any of two. If it is nadari, then it necessitates any the affirmation of speculation with speculation, and that is any daur. So this is any a question any a person any as though any a person any is asking. So he said that if what you call it yani this nadar, that using our intellect yani to ponder yani upon yani things that can bring that it can bring any to knowledge, if this kind any of knowledge is daruri, if it is knowledge any based any on necessary, he says certainly there will be no differences. So again he's referring any to the previous thing, because the previous any what you call it he mentioned any then some people rejected that the intellect any that people can acquire knowledge any through the intellect, because any of the differences any of the atheists and the some any of the philosophers any which he mentioned any as Sumaniya, which they reject any the notion that the intellect any can bring about knowledge. Another question any is that they ask is that if any it can bring any about any knowledge, and if that any knowledge any can be knowledge any of necessary, meaning the intellect any can bring about necessary knowledge, then there will not any be differences. There will not be differences. Just like any there is no differences, one is half of two, and this is knowledge any that is based any on daruri. And if the knowledge any is nadari, if the knowledge any is nadari, yani from the intellect, lazima isbatu nadar bin nadar wa innahu daur. So it is just like any saying that we are speculating something through speculation. So this is the question. Then he answered. He said, قُلْنَا الضَّرُورِ قَدْ يَقَعْ فِيهِ خِلَافٌ. He said it doesn't mean any that knowledge any that is acquired by daruri, by necessary, there is no differences, but there is differences. there can be differences and even when comes to necessary knowledge. So he gave the example imma li'inan, like some people for example they just reject. For example, we gave the famous example we believe, for example, we say that this glass is in existence. This glass is in existence. This is knowledge that is daruri. But there are people who reject this. Why? Li'inad. And this is one of the schools of Nasafiyyah. There are people who negate even realities. The things that they see in front of their eyes, they negate them. And they can even negate one half of two. They say this is something that what you call it is not necessarily true. So Al-Imam Taftazani mentioned that even for daruri, people can reject. But does that mean that it is not correct? Does that mean that whenever you have differences when it comes to certain things, that it means it is not true? No, the truth is still the truth. But the problem is the perception of people. And there are many reasons for that. So one of it, he said, imma li'inadin aw liqusurin fil idrak. So either this particular person is what you call it, just for the sake of rejection, and he doesn't want to believe. This point number one. Number two is liqusurin fil idrak, because he does not have the ability to understand it. He does not have the ability to understand. And for example, a blind person, if you tell him for example there is a glass in front of you, he might not believe. He might not believe. He might say there is no glass in front of me. But now there is it is not about whether there is a glass or there is not a glass, but what you call it, this person does not have the ability to come to a certainty because he is blind. So the fault lies in his disability to use his senses to come to that knowledge of certainty. Then he mentioned فَإِنَّ الْعَقْلَ مُتَفَاوِتَ, because the intellect of human beings, they differ from one person to another person. بِحَسَبِ الْفِطْرَةِ, and this goes back to what you call it, our biological what you call it our biological differences. There are some people for example they are blessed with a high level of intellectual capacity that they can understand many things. There are some people who doesn't have that speciality. So the intellect of people they differ from one person to another person. And likewise wal istidlal min al athar, and to what you call it, to use istidlal to experiment something to come to conclusions. Also we have differences on the abilities of people. Wa shahadatu min al akhbar, and likewise in terms of witnessing, witnessing reports and determining the truth of reports that come to us. People have differences in understanding and in knowing whether this is true or this is false. And then one nadhari qad yasbutu bi nadharin makhsoos la yu'abbar anhu bin nadhar. And when it comes to speculative knowledge, it depends on how that person speculates. It depends on how that person speculates. Kama yuqalu qawluna al-alam mutaghayyir. So he gave the example. He gave the example of knowledge that is nadhari, that the universe changes. Wa kullu mutaghayyirin hadith, and everything that change is contingent. Yufidul ilma bi hudusil alam بالضرورة, that it brings about the conclusion that is necessary. What is the conclusion? That the universe is contingent. So although the first premises another are based on speculation, that we look at the universe, that universe is changing, and we have understood that everything that change is contingent, then we come to the conclusion, and this is knowledge that is necessary. So he said وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ لِخُصُوصِيَّةِ هَذَا النَّظَرِ بَلْ لِكَوْنِهِ صَحِيحًا مَقْرُونًا بِشَرَائِطِهِ. So even though this ponderance is part of speculation, but it brings about the truth. It brings about the truth, even though it is based on nadari, but knowledge any that is nadari can lead to daruri, can lead any to daruri. How does it lead any to daruri and certainty? When we use what you call it, through the right methodology. That when you use any our intellect and with the right any methodology, then it will bring about knowledge any of certainty. فيكون كل نظري صحيح مقرون بشرائطه مفيدا للعلم. That this methodology and it will always and bring about knowledge and that is beneficial بشرائطه, but of course and with the condition. And then he mentioned وفي تحقيق هذا المنع زيادة تفصيل لا يليق بهذا الكتاب. So he said any this notion and it has to be explained any more, and because any this book and is just a summary, so he said that it is not appropriate for me to lengthen these arguments any more than what is mentioned. So let us any read any the English and the translation and before we stop for today. So he said, we say there is an argument regarding the daruri necessary knowledge as well, either to obstinacy or due to deficiency in comprehension, because the intellect is of different stages, proportionate any to the fitrah, according to ittifaq, yani the agreement any of the thinkers. This is arrived any through istidlal any from the athar and testification from the reports. So this is the first part, that's what I mentioned. The differences any amongst people, ability, intellectual any capacity to understand any things. So speculative any knowledge can be affirmed with specific speculation, which is not termed speculation any, like how it is said, our statement the world changes and everything that changes is hadith, yani contingent, that is by necessity brings about knowledge of the fact that the world any came into existence, and that is not because of a speciality of this speculation, but rather because of it being sahih, that this argument any is correct, and it brings any about any to what you call it, the truth. So to use any this methodology of ponderance of the right way of using any our intellect, this is where the author is speaking any about, and it can bring any to sound knowledge. Thus every sound speculative knowledge that is attached to its conditions can bring about knowledge. So this is basically saying, at the end of the day, is saying any that intellect any brings any about knowledge. Whether we are speaking about knowledge that is daruri or knowledge any that is nadari, it brings any about any knowledge if we use the right any methodology in using any that intellect. In the verification of this prohibition, there is a need for additional details which is not suitable for this kitab. And then he mentioned وَمَا ثَبَتَ مِنْهُ أي من العلم السبب بالعقل بالبديهة. Inshallah, we will continue in our next any lesson, and inshallah. And as what I mentioned to those in the WhatsApp group, we will see how inshallah, if a lot of you finds some of this difficult, inshallah, I will consider just concentrate on the matan of Nasafiyyah. We will see how it is inshallah ta'ala. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adhaban nar. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.